Hello, everyone. You're listening to episode 9 of Peppermint Philosophy. I'm your host, Adam Burgess, and before we get into the podcast today, I've actually got a read. I know it's come out of nowhere, but yes, there is something I would like to advertise on the podcast and a way that you can support the podcast if you want to. But it's kind of something which I think that I use, that I think other people should use, especially if you've been listening to this, you kind of know my views on sort of social media / big tech companies and how I worry about their sort of influence on us and the way that they do business. And I think I've been, starting to try and find solutions to some of these problems, mainly with the biggest problem maker and the hardest one for me to detach from personally, Google, both the search engine and the browser. Because, like me, you might be someone who just used Chrome out of convenience because it seems, fairly user-friendly and all of that. But did you know that whilst you have a Chrome window open, it often leeches away at your battery life and your computer power? The reason it can do this is because it's actually doing a load of really weird and creepy stuff. It's tracking your data, storing it, it's using it, and it's probably selling it on. And that's not really good for anyone, in my opinion. You can have the opinion that data is just a thing of the future and everyone's going to do it, but there are actually companies now that are moving in the other direction and fighting the good fight. And we should join them. If we don't want this new age of weird companies using our data and selling it on to creepy companies like Cambridge Analytica and other such foreign entities potentially that can use it for ill will, or even our own domestic entities, you should start joining this new age of tech companies. And today I would like to encourage you to download a web browser called Brave. Brave is a web browser which tries to do things differently. It doesn't collect your data. In fact, actually, it has a built-in ad blocker which destroys all of these weird ads, doesn't collect any data, removes trackers where it finds them, resulting in both a faster browser experience where pages load like lightning, but also it gets rid of all of the battery draining, leeching stuff. Saves you time, and you can see it when you open a new browser page. It shows you how much time it's saving you. It shows you how many ads and trackers it's blocked. It shows you how many HTTPs it's upgraded to an HTTPS. And if you're like me and you don't really know what any of this stuff means, it sounds like it's doing a good thing. It's making things more secure. It's protecting your data from these weird and creepy entities. Not only that, but they're partnered with DuckDuckGo, which is a search engine which, doesn't track or steal your data or use it to optimize, in quotation marks, but we all know what that means, right? That means that they're just gonna fucking sell it on to some weird creepy dude. Google, if you're listening, don't sue me. But you know what I mean. The point is that we are moving into an age where our own personal security, our own data and privacy can be used in weird ways. This isn't just a case of, well, if you have nothing to hide, then why should you be worried? It's not about that. It's about the fact that they're actually using this data, selling it and making money off of you as some sort of product rather than, the consumer. Another feature that Brave uses is that they actually treat you like a customer, and you can opt in and out of advertisements. And essentially what this means is you can go on the thing and set up a little what's called a Brave reward system, where you can decide how many ads you want to see, and Brave essentially vets these advertisers. They have to fit a certain set of rules, essentially not it shouldn't be targeted towards you in any way. It will just pop up every now and then you can just dismiss it. But what happens with this is that if you do set up ads to appear on your browser, essentially what's going to happen is you're going to receive 70% of the ad revenue from that, which essentially translates into this cryptocurrency called basic attention tokens, which you can then use to donate to creators that you like me, or others. You can, if they've got an account set up with Brave, they can accept your donations. It's a way that you can directly contribute to creators and people that you want to support without having to, I guess, properly spend real money that you have at the moment. I believe that, this is still in its infancy, so there might be some sort of way that the token system can be adapted to help you out and so that you can use it to purchase stuff for yourself. But for now, you can help out someone like me. But anyway, if you want to give Brave a try, I would I don't want to beg you, but it would be nice if you would download it through the link brave.com/PEP424. That's brave.com/PEP424. That's my, I guess, the Peppermint Philosophy code. If you download it through there and use it for 30 days, the podcast receives a little bit of money, which will help it, it's going to run anyway, because as I've said in previous episodes, this is more just for me to try something new and enjoy, but any contributions like that will help me essentially keep the website up and all of that sort of stuff. But at the end of the day, it's not about that. It's about trying to vote with your dollar, I guess. Do you really want to be supporting companies that are carrying out immoral practices? And of course, I'm new to Brave. I've been using it for about, a week or so. It's really good. It's very quick. It's very snappy. It works similarly to Chrome. It looks the same. It has a similar sort of usability because it's actually built on the Chrome engine. It just cuts out all of the weird, creepy stuff. And obviously if that changes, I will rescind my support. But until then, I think it's a nice alternative. It's built with the right kind of idea. It's built with the idea of having user control over their data, which is, as I've talked about in previous episodes, when quoting the great Jaron Lanier, that's kind of what we're after, and I'm moving into this phase of trying to detach the weird tendrils of Google from my existence in day-to-day life. So bit by bit, I'll be using these kinds of technologies, I guess, and I will be recommending them to you guys in future. And even if you think that what I'm saying is kind of weird, conspiratorial, mumbo jumbo, tinfoil hat stuff, that's fine. But Brave is also way faster than Google Chrome. It's way more snappy, doesn't use up as much of your battery because it's not spending half of the time trying to mine all of that data that you've been providing it and just, building up its own weird machine around it. So yeah, give it a try. brave.com/PEP424. Support the podcast if you want, but if not, just support yourself. Be brave. Ditch your old web browser. Today's episode of the podcast, it's me hanging out with two of my boys from the Peppermint Chill podcast, Rob and Jake. See, we decided that this week we'd discuss a little bit more of sort of philosophy stuff, and I actually think this is probably the first episode that is actually philosophical and discusses different philosophies, Also, apologies for the sound of cars going past. It's really warm here, and I need to have the window open so I don't end up dying. But yeah, it was a really, really nice conversation. I think it's building upon the kind of stuff that I started with Shiva, in that I want it to be more sort of ordinary people having these conversations. I like that as an idea. Getting normal people on, just having these conversations, because at the end of the day, all of us can, should, and hopefully will have these kinds of conversations with our friends and family, just discussing issues and discussing problems that we face in day-to-day life and potential solutions to those things, and sharing our own experiences so that we can get a different perspective of the world around us, and to enrich our understanding of how people are, and how people survive and cope and live, all of these things. You can get such great insights and new angles when you talk to different people, even people that you think you know quite well, and you might even think that you can't have these kinds of conversations, but I'm like, you know what? Nah, let's all just have these conversations. I don't know where I'm going with this. I think I'm just sort of trying to fluff up the time a little bit now, but yeah, this was a great conversation. We talk about a range of different things. Of course, we talk about social media for a bit because it's my favorite topic in the world. We talk a lot about personal problems and sort of personal improvement, and I suppose finding solutions to human struggles that we feel. We kind of went on for quite a little bit of time. So yeah, have a listen. Skip through, do whatever you want. Enjoy the podcast. Thank you very much. Yeah. Hello, you're listening to Peppermint Philosophy. I'm your host, Adam Burgess, and today I'm joined by my two mates from Peppermint Chill, Jake and Rob.
Hello.
And good luck trying to figure out which one's which. But yeah, so today we're just sort of going to have a little conversation, because I think really the three of us are quite, we're thinking human beings. We like to discuss interesting topics, and we all have our own opinions of things.
Like turkey twizzlers.
Exactly, like turkey twizzlers. And that will be coming out in a soon to be released episode.
Next millennium.
Next millennium of Peppermint Chill. But I kind of wanted to start off by talking about, because I was thinking actually the origins of Peppermint Philosophy actually came from our boy Jake here, because a year ago, it was a little over a year ago, we were sat in a bar, just hanging out and just discussing stuff, and we kind of, we were discussing all of our personal struggles and how we overcome them, and there was a lot of talk about fueling the fire, and then we were like, we should do a podcast that's this kind of stuff, and because the bar was called Peppermint, shout out
to Peppermint.
We were just like, Peppermint Philosophy, that's kind of the origin. So there we go, that's the origin story of this. So Jake, technically I stole the name from you, so sorry, brother.
Yeah, I'm gonna sue you in a few years' time. I'm gonna get big.
That's if Peppermint doesn't sue us.
The
origin myth for Peppermint Chill is much cooler than that.
Yeah, it was that I made the podcast Peppermint Philosophy, and then we went for a different. We originally had a different name. I can't even remember what it was. We had several names, and then
we've got some pilots that we might release, we might just use as future podcasts, and no one will know.
Yeah, exactly, because no one listens anyway. But anyway, kind of moving on from that, those conversations we were having over a year ago. I've been thinking about stuff like, purpose, and trying to kind of, deal with personal struggles and stuff. And I think lately all of us have kind of been going through a personal struggle or struggle in general. I don't know. Would you agree with that? And that's kind of been recently. We've all sort of been struggling with different things.
Yeah, this lockdown is driving me nuts.
Yeah, I'd say so.
Yeah, I mean, what sort of methods do you guys tend to go for when you're thinking about, you know, how am I going to get out of a rut?
Complaining about it to you guys.
It's a tough one, but I don't think there's any surefire way of doing it. But I have taken up running as a kind of way to kind of force a sort of isolated mental state, because then you kind of have to focus on what you're doing rather than whatever else is going on.
Right. Yeah, no, I find, because I mean, we all know that running's a big thing for me. In fact, I've talked about it quite a bit in the podcast in previous episodes. But yeah, I think running for me was definitely a big, I guess, gave me goals to aim for and things to do. And I think the thing about running is that it is kind of a moving meditation in some ways, because even though you're putting yourself under all this stress and you know, your body might be hurting, your lungs are burning or whatever, you can end up just going into almost a trance and just sort of shutting everything out, all of the noise. You know, you're running on autopilot and just sort of focusing on, you know, where you want to go and just almost like just clearing your mind of all of the shit that's going on. So for me, it's been like this great ability to just tune out for an hour or so and just, you know, almost chill.
I'm still working on the tuning out.
I think it's one of
burning and out of breath and just being like, somebody fucking find me a seat.
That's like part of the process, right? It's like I think this is the thing with running especially, and with any sort of exercise, you always start from that position of being like, shit, this is hard. You know, it's running and swimming and all of these kinds of, like, they're almost like basic known movements. It's like, it's not like lifting. Lifting's a bit different because you're doing something that you've probably never done before. But then when you're running, it's like, oh yeah, I used to run around, you know, I've run before, I can run if I want to. And you fall into the state of thinking, oh yeah, I could probably, you know, run a mile easy. And then when you actually go to run a mile, it's fucking hard, right?
Yeah, your muscles are like, bro, you haven't used me in years. What made you think like we were still waiting for you to like just start running again?
But it's one of those brilliant like revelations, because it's like you realize that actually you're not as strong as you think you are, and that maybe it's something, because it is a simple exercise in the end of the day, and like if you keep with it, you're going to get stronger, you're going to get, you know, better at doing it, and your body will get more used to it. And I think with running especially, it's like, it's not only a physical exercise, it's a mental one as well, because a big part of it is getting, because a lot of people, they can run quite well, but they either don't think that they can go as far as they can, or they get bored doing it because it's quite monotonous, and you have to basically deal with yourself the whole time, because you can't exactly just like run along and have a chat. It's like, even if you run with someone else, it's very difficult to just have like a normal conversation. So I think part of it's just training that mental strength to just stick with it, and then ultimately, once you've built up that strength, you can just like basically just realize the limits of your body, because I reckon most people can go a lot further than they actually think they can. They just need to have that control center telling their body, it's like, no, we're going to do this, we're going to move this far, we're going to go this distance. Yeah. How are you feeling with it though? Learning the ropes, I guess.
A little bit, yeah. It's still sort of like, I sort of set goals for my runs, and like I don't really care whether it's a bad or a good one. I kind of just go, try to hit my time goal or my distance, like, well, I'm always trying to hit the time goal, but like within that, I'm trying to hit like, okay, if I can run without stopping to here, and then push a little bit further on the next one, kind of thing.
Yeah.
But it's still kind of getting used to it. I think for me, it's kind of just like a way, just trying to clear my head, trying to sort of focus in on something, so my mind isn't like occupied by like everything.
Yeah.
And in a way, it feels good because you kind of like, it's kind of one of those things, ain't it, in life? Like you always need to feel some kind of burn and all that. Like I wanted to say suffering, but it's not so much. It's not that bad. But you need to sort of have some kind of like pushing a boulder up a hill kind of exercise routine.
Yeah. Well, that's it. But I almost say that it is a form of suffering, because I think that's a big thing with exercise these days. It's like a lot of us, because we live these really cushy lives, and we've gotten into this frame of mind where we kind of have most of our needs fulfilled. We kind of need those things that put us out of our comfort zone, that challenge us and give us physical challenge. I think is important, because you can have virtual challenges, video games and stuff like that, which to an extent they might fulfill some of it, but that side of things almost becomes escapism to me. And so when you actually face the reality of I'm going to go out, I'm going to run, I'm going to lift, I'm going to swim, I'm going to run, whatever it might be, all of these physical challenges which cause your body to actually be like, shit, I need to get up and do something, I need to activate all of these muscles which I've never used before. I feel like that is it's a low level of suffering, but it is a form of suffering that I think we almost need in order to feel fulfilled as human beings. What about you, Rob? What's your thoughts on, like, I guess, because you said that you often complain to us, and like I wouldn't call it complaining. That makes it sound like it's whinging, and maybe sometimes it verges on that. But I think a lot of the time, like, you need people to de-stress, to decongest.
No, I think one of the reasons I like complaining to you guys is it's usually not something directly related to me personally. It's just something I see that I think just sounds so ridiculous, and I almost just need to bounce the idea off somebody else just to remind myself that I'm not nuts and not everyone thinks like that, and that that just get some. It's just nice to have some confirmation that you're not the weird one in the situation. That's the wrong way of putting it. That you're the sensible one in the situation, and that the person writing the ridiculous thing is a tiny minority. Because and I don't know if we're going to get into this, but like you say, the social media gives everyone an equal voice, whether they deserve it or not. And that's the wrong way of putting it. It gives everyone an equal voice, and you've got no way of personally assessing what the person saying it is like. Because if it's... I don't mean this in a condescending way, because I'm no genius myself, but there's a lot of dumbasses out there, and every dumbass in a modern country can write and read and form their own opinions, regardless of how strange they might be. And so you read that, and there's no differentiating it between the opinion of someone who you might actually be interested in hearing what they've got to say, or considering their viewpoint worth considering. So you've got all the shit swamping all the diamonds, I suppose is one way of putting it. Yeah. And it's like that George Carlin quote, imagine the average person and then think about the fact that half of everybody is stupider than them.
Yeah. No, I think you've hit the nail on the head there, and we've gotten to my favourite topic of social media. No. We're not gonna lean too heavily on that.
I don't mean what I'm saying condescendingly either.
No.
The people, regardless of their intelligence, they will write stupid things anyway. Yeah. And to be honest, a lot of the people that use Twitter probably consider themselves quite smart. even though the fact that they use Twitter and post regularly on it, and if you ever get into a Twitter argument, it doesn't matter what you do for a living or how smart you are an idiot.
Yeah.
You're
no,
a fool.
I 100% agree. I think it's one of those things. You're 100% right with the whole, like, I don't think it's condescending to say, you know, that social media has elevated everyone to this, you know, you've got this equal footing of voice, right? And I think that sounds great in principle, because it's like, oh yeah, well, everyone can, you know, everyone from whatever background can say something and it can be heard by everyone. But it's gotten to the point where so many people are talking at the same time that all you have is this noise that's almost unnavigatable, to the point where, you know, like you were saying, the good opinions and more importantly the expert opinions get drowned out. Because at the end of the day, if we're talking about a specific subject, say vaccines or astrophysics or genetics, not everyone has an equal voice on those subjects, right? You know, there are people who spend their lives studying these subjects. Their voice is far more, you know, important than, say, me talking about, you know, astrophysics, because at the end of the day, I don't really know anything about it. I think that feeds into it quite a bit, because there's almost this mentality of everyone has to have an opinion on everything. But I also think the caveat to that is that we do have to take it with a pinch of salt, because when you think about it, most people aren't using social media. It's a small subsection of the population, really, who are actively using it. But I guess where my concerns lie is that small subsection gets pretty much all of the attention, because most media companies are really balls deep in the social media machine.
Yeah, but coming on what you said about experts, I think that can be a negative as well. Not that we shouldn't listen to experts.
Trust the experts.
No, I'm not saying that at all. That was a good. Jake was giving us there a good example of how people on Twitter would respond. I know you were being facetious, like, obviously, but in case anyone who uses Twitter is listening and thinks that Jake was being serious, or that I'm being serious now. No, but that is a prime example where I start making of why Twitter's bad. I start making my point, and then you can get someone just taking part of what you say and doing that. And that's where I say about this thing about, it comes on to my point about experts. It's the fact that these people take their expertise. This is one example where they'll take their expertise and stretch it to the point where they're applying it to issues that really don't completely concern their given expertise. You know, where they're commenting
to throw
on
a spanner in the works. I can't remember if there's a name for like the theory, or not really a theory, just like the phenomenon. But there's that whole thing about, like, if you ask, say, 200 people how many jelly beans are in a jar.
Oh shit!
And,
I love.
You know, everyone will say different answers, and if you take the wide scope of the answers, you will wind up with an average that's pretty close to the correct answer. So my argument would be giving everyone a voice through social media, and although you have to put up with the whole like shitstorm of dumb opinions and people just shouting from the rooftops whatever they fucking think and feel, not really giving too much of a thoughtful process to what they're saying, it does sort of have that jelly bean effect. There you go, patented the name for it. Jelly bean effect, where you will arrive at some kind of consensus on the issue.
I disagree and agree with that. But I think partially it's true, but also the problem is it tends to focus on the extremes too much. So there's a difficulty finding the middle ground.
I think that's because we have like this natural tendency to react like strongly to the extremes, whereas everything in the middle, which is the majority of everyone's opinion, kind of just like everyone's just like, oh yeah, that's understandable, and oh, I get what he's saying, and that sounds about right to me. Whereas then, Twitter's like one of those things where it's the reactionary stuff that's hitting the front page or the trending. So that's all you're going to see.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean those other opinions aren't there.
But I'd say that's exactly what's wrong with all social media. The whole reactionary stuff, it's like, well, you're not meant to have an opinion about everything.
Yeah, but I think that's kind of the same though. Like if it was a town hall rather than Twitter, and everyone's just like, I don't. We want dark chocolate to be the staple, and like not milk chocolate anymore. And everyone's kind of like, you get like a bunch of people like yeah, and you get a bunch of people like no, and then you get one nutcase like, fuck chocolate, it should be sweets. Everyone's gonna be like, what the fuck are you on about sweets?
Yeah, but the difference,
that's what everyone is going to react to.
The difference when it's a town hall, though, is the fact that you can make your case more eloquently and have a proper discussion. Whereas when it's just anonymous,
the nature of the beast with the internet, though. Like you have your 15 seconds and you got to go. Like the internet's like fucking 240 miles per hour.
Yeah, but isn't that what's kind of bad about it?
Yeah, that's the negative.
That's the problem, because it's giving you this illusion of your voice matters, when in actuality it's just reducing it to this minimal soundbite, which is not enough time to make your point clear, which is not enough time to actually do anything with it.
Yeah, I understand that, but then it's also the same with politicians anyway outside of the internet.
100%, but I mean,
there's no time. People don't want to hear eloquent.
Yeah, but the problem with that is you
discussions. They want a soundbite. They want it straight to the point, and they don't want to mess around.
Yeah, but if that's
why politicians have been forced into this position.
No, they haven't been forced into it. They gave into it. If they had never given into it, they should have just been. If you're too lazy to listen and do your own research and think for yourself, don't bother. You can live your life perfectly well, not being engaged and just learning at the periphery, and you will still get a generally good idea of what's going on.
I mean,
and it comes
while
back...
I agree, I do think there's like sort of like what you're sort of suggesting is isolating groups of people, because you're basically like, well, it's our way or the highway, and like.
No, I'm not talking about isolating people. I'm just talking about
even on Twitter. Like you're saying, this is the illusion of. Like your voice mattering and whatever, and yeah, you're kind of right, but then shouldn't we all have a platform to speak our opinions?
But there are alternate. People always did have in free societies, but the difference is in a situation.
You think
like
without
Twitter,
the internet, people would feel like their voice mattered, or they could make some kind of a difference?
Yes, because the internet's only existed for 30 years, and before that, there were plenty of mass movements where people made their opinion very clear.
Yeah. But here's what I'd argue. I'd say that is about community. That's about people coming together to make their voice like one, to make a change. And yeah, it happens without the internet, but I'd say the internet has amplified that to a global scale. You look at the Black Lives Matter thing, that spread from the US to the UK and beyond.
Yeah, but the problem with a lot of these soundbite activism that has infested politics and everything today really is the fact that it's not only is it's very easy to make your point, yes, much easier than it used to be, but it's also far too easy to dismiss a point you don't like as well. You don't have to engage with anything. That's the problem. Whereas using the town hall debate that we had earlier, when someone gets up and makes their point, someone else then has to address it. They're forced to. They can't just ignore what the other person said, because everyone in the room still heard it. So they can ignore it, but they're not going to be able to make their counterpoint as well if they do.
That's fair. I kind of agree, but also wouldn't you kind of say that then that makes it so unless there's a substantial voice, like a substantial group of people saying that one opinion, then it must not need to be listened to?
No, because you're not going to...
If you're there shouting from the rooftops like, I want sweets to be the staple thing in all the shops, no more chocolate, and no one else is saying that, then you just kind of dismiss it.
No. But the problem is that's the same whether you have the internet or not. And the problem with that also is that there's a danger of fringe groups getting too much of a voice and becoming... It's a bit of a cliche to talk about silent majorities, but there's lots of issues going on today where, and it's happened in the past as well, and it sometimes is positive and sometimes is negative, but events where maybe the majority of people aren't in favour of it, or at the very least are ambivalent about it, but there's a small, very noisy minority that are trying to force a big change. It can be both positive and negative, but it's being amplified on social media now and the internet generally, because it's so much easier to lobby for these fringe groups and to present things in a way. Fake news comes into it because it comes a way to present things to people in positions of authority and amplify things. And there's I'm reading a book at the moment, and the person that wrote it, I can't remember their name, but there's a thing that they coined where it talks about crisis and the fact that a crisis is always amplified with how it's reported, and things always seem...
Now you're talking about traditional media, though.
Well, any has become a part of the whole
but it's any. It's because when you talk about situations, how bad things are, and I mean coronavirus is a good example of it, and it's not wrong to say people are dying of coronavirus, and it's quite frightening for certain groups of people. But most people know nobody that has had coronavirus, has never encountered anyone with coronavirus. And it's not to say it's not happening and it's not dangerous, but to watch the news and all this talk of a global pandemic, if you were to look at that as a neutral observer, not seeing what daily life is like, you would think we were at panic stations, but most people are just getting on with their lives. And it's the same with the example they give is, because I think they were writing it in the 70s, is if you were to look then, you would imagine that walking out on the street you would have mass strikes, crime, race riots, hordes of neo-Nazi gangs, rampant corruption, terrible traffic congestion, pollution, all this stuff. But the day-to-day person will not notice any of that or see any of them.
Yeah.
And the very fact that it's being reported in a certain way amplifies it. And it's demonstrated by the fact that in America as well, through a certain period of time, they had a massive surge of serial killers, and they also had a massive surge of suicides. I think it was in the 70s and 80s. And it's one of the reasons they believe is because of how sensationalized it was reported on the news, and news outlets started changing how they report on these events, and there was a decline after that. I don't know enough about it I've only read about that particular thing. There might be other reasons why it happened.
Well, I was just thinking, I'm pretty sure US news is still like so sensational.
Yeah.
It is, but it's about new, or not new, but more recent phenomena like school shootings and things like that. Whereas serial killings and suicides are not reported on in the same way.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I'm just gonna butt in because there's tons to digest there. I wrote a couple of notes because I'm going to backtrack a little bit. So you brought up like the jelly bean experiment. I love this example because it's one that was actually brought up in 10 Arguments for Deleting Your Social Media Accounts Now by Jaron Lanier. Shout out.
It was probably you who told it to me. Then.
No, yeah, it might be. But the thing with that is that, so the idea of that is that it's such a brilliant example of like the marriage between collectives and the individual, and because I feel like a lot of the time everyone's looking at like you're either a collectivist or an individualist. You can't be both, but it's the idea of actually maybe the best collectives are made up of individuals. And it is true, it's like when you get a classroom full of people and you give them a jar of jelly beans, if you get them to guess the number, average it out, you're usually somewhere near the true number. But the problem with social media, I'd argue, is that you have that going on, but then at the same time, you also have people, for whatever reason, spreading images of other jars of jelly beans and claiming that it's the jelly bean jar. You've got weird entities trying to talk about how you need more jelly beans and how there's not enough production. Basically you've got all of these weird entities, political, corporate, or just weird conspiracy theorist types and fake news spewers, all in this realm, given the exact same level of, I guess, they're given the same voice as literally everyone else. And so you kind of numb the idea of having that, lovely idea of everyone's opinion gives you something near the truth, because everyone's truth is skewed. And I think you do end up with, because it's the idea of, the Hegelian idea of, thesis, antithesis, and synthesis, where the two sides come together to some sort of conclusion. But you end up with this problem in that, we don't have that happening, I don't think, much in modern politics. And it ends up becoming, you have the thesis and the antithesis, and they just keep going in their own direction. So you've got these two extreme sides consolidating themselves, and the synthesis, which is usually what ends up happening, is lost in all of that. We call it debate, but actually it's just straight up argument, or almost political warfare, because you got these two sides so entrenched in their own ideas, or their own ideas. I'd argue that they're actually pack ideas. They're not necessarily, it veers you towards one side or the other, and chances are if you're a moderate on one side, you're going to move further towards whichever side you sit, beyond the center. I think that's kind of the problem with this whole machine, and it has resulted in media getting involved with it, because in order to stay active and relevant, because social media is a great way to spread news and to get information out there, but in order to be on that trending list, which is essentially that's the currency of success on Twitter, for example, and on Facebook and all of these other ones, the currency is to be on that trending list. And the way that you get on that trending list as traditional media is that you sensationalize, and I agree 100%. Media has always sensationalized, but at least it had its own bottleneck in television and newspapers and stuff, where you could just avoid it. On social media, if you're tuned into it, I feel like it just pops up in your face, and it's trying to get that reaction. It's either trying to get you to react positively, comment, like, share, or better yet, to comment negatively and start this huge thread of people just arguing with each other and calling each other horrible names. And instead of, they get into this, like, I used to get into these spats, right? And my personal experience is, looking back, it was such a waste of time. But there's something so gratifying about being able to just point at someone and go, gotcha. You said this, but actually it's this. And it's always like the smallest thing. There's never like a broad issue that it's always the kind of thing which actually you probably could have ignored, that you just, you shit on them for no real reason. I think that's kind of the problem with that whole machine in general. It gears you to be anti something rather than trying to find this middle ground where we can all come together and share our ideas and actually progress together with something that, fits within both sides, so that everyone's kind of moderately happy.
Yeah, it comes back to what I said about, it's a way of putting your opinion forward where you don't need to engage with the opposing view. Yeah. You state your opinion, someone responds, or you see someone else's that you take exception to, and you respond, and that's it. There's no engagement, and doesn't matter if you behave in bad faith or deliberately misconstrue what they say. You've said it. There you go. It's there. It's juvenile. It's ridiculous, and people who do it are. I just don't understand them. I don't know why you would waste your time doing it. And I don't know what you think you're achieving. It's like commenting on a YouTube video. It's just asinine. It's pointless.
It's like a personal attack to who I used to be. I think it's justified, because I hate the amount of time I wasted. I hate how it drove me into this idea, you know, these weird positions where I was like, maybe I didn't totally agree with whatever side I was, you know, arguing for, but because it was part of the, you know, the greater good, I justified it. And then at the end of the day, I was like, you know, a young man, barely out of teens, and I thought that I was an adult. Actually, it turns out I didn't know shit. And I think the part of the problem is and that I want to bring it back to something else you said, Jake, about you know, it gives everyone a voice, and we have this ability to on a global scale come together and project idea. And I think that's a great idea in principle. But I feel that what that's led to as this technology has evolved is that we end up in this position where we're almost too focused on big picture stuff, and we forget that the foundation to all big picture progress is, you know, individual progress and then community progress, and all of these layers where it builds up and up and up. We always want to solve these huge overarching issues that are, you know, global issues, rather than, say, an issue that affects me in my personal life, which also affects someone else who I know, which affects my community. And, you know, it's almost that principle of, like, you know, you throw a stone in a pond and you cause a ripple, and the ripple is your effect on yourself and your immediate environment. And having that self-improvement, I think, contributes to that, is that you can influence people around you, and ultimately in the end you can change the big picture stuff by focusing inward. And it goes back to that. I think Obama said it. It was like, you know, it was something like, you know, you go to a town hall, you change the minds of people in a room. They go out, they change the minds of a city. That city changes the minds of the state. You know, and basically it's that idea of, if you start off small, big things can happen. And I think the problem is there's too much top-down change, or there's too much attempt at a top-down change. And at the end of the day, most of the time that doesn't really work. And so people just end up getting more frustrated and more nihilistic in all of it, instead of, you know, focusing on themselves, looking inward, improving themselves, doing things that improve themselves, and then from doing that, causing a greater effect. Yeah, I'm done ranting.
No, I agree with you. I used to comment on YouTube videos, never anything political or anything. I used to just post stupid stuff, like trolley things, and it was pointless. But I kind of reconcile myself with it in two ways. One, I stopped doing it once I turned about 15. And two, it was only trolley stuff. It was never... There was never any presumption of any intelligence in them. I knew I was being stupid when I was doing it, but the difference was I was too immature to realise how pointless it was.
Yeah.
But I've been quite lucky in that I've never... I think partly because I used to be quite shy, so I just never used to write things on Facebook, because I never used to like using my Facebook. Or not that I didn't like using my Facebook, I didn't like presenting myself, you know, and putting myself out there too much. So I used to just never really comment. And I never used Twitter. I didn't really get into using Twitter until a couple of years ago. And I still never post anything. I just like reading stuff.
Yeah. Well, I mean, my final point, I guess, would be... So, because you never really got into the Facebook stuff. Imagine the frustration you feel when you share something with us. That's me, but that used to be me, but I would go on the comment section. I would speak my mind to that. So I think your way, in some ways, is a much healthier outlet for it. Because at least we can then turn around and go, hey, Rob, you're... Calm down, bro.
Yeah, and to be honest, it's more, like I say, it's more like just a sanity check, and just to remind myself, not everyone thinks like this. This is just some fool that's probably not even thought through what they're saying, and if you were to speak to them in person, would probably give a much more sensible presentation of their views.
That's when I turn around.
What if we were just an echo chamber, though, Rob?
Oh shit!
I mean, to a certain extent, you are, but at the same time, you don't want to be constantly having political debates with your friends, do you?
No.
There's nothing wrong with being in an echo chamber as long as you're aware of the fact.
Yeah, that's true. Does anyone want to make any final points? Because I want to veer away from
No,
social media.
I think we've covered this quite well.
Jake?
No.
Okay. All right. Well, so we kind of touched on it with the nihilism aspect. I didn't really think of this, but now I have. I kind of want to. I mean, so I think it's quite easy to fall into like a nihilistic perspective, to be like, nothing's working, everything's kind of going wrong. There's no point to existing or whatever. It's very easy to get into that sort of headspace. I was wondering if you guys have kind of ever touched into that kind of dark realm.
No, I think partly because I've got a more... I've got a broader view of history than most people do, just because I've studied it more and I'm interested in it. And I think when you look at history, it makes you realise that it comes back a bit to what I said about the person who wrote about how things seem worse based on how they're reported. But a lot of human history, there has been no guiding point. It's kind of just muddled along. It's been one long instance of cause and effect. And it's why counterfactual history is so difficult. Counterfactual history is like alternate history, guessing what would have happened what if Germany had won World War One, that type of thing.
Yeah. Because
as soon as one thing changes, it can veer in so many different directions.
Yeah.
But this idea of, we're doomed, how are we going to move on? The country's terrible now, it's awful now. It's just like, no, it's not. All the problems we're going through today they're not the same, but we react to them in the same way. And a lot of the time, it's not going to cause a huge issue. Not every crisis is like Cuba in 1962.
Yeah.
It's not the end of the world at stake all the time. And people talk as though humanity is some kind of plague on the world. It's like, no, we're not. And we're getting better. And that's one thing that humanity is always good at. That you see, if you have a broad view of history, is adapting. And even when bad stuff happens, we adapt in interesting ways. They're not necessarily good or bad. They're just what is suitable for that situation. For example, Corona. We're going through a pandemic now. Lots of people compare it to the Black Plague. Very, very, very erroneously. But look at the Black Plague as an example of a huge disaster that was devastating for humans. It wiped out between a third and half of Europe, or it's estimated to have.
Yeah.
And can you imagine that happening today? A real life version of the Thanos snap almost, except you've seen everyone disappear, wither and die over the course of years. But society adapted and
You're trying
evolved.
To say no one walked around at the time going, "This is fucking horrible. Life is shit."
Yeah, they probably did in certain circumstances.
They were just like, you know what, this is fine because we adapt.
But the point is, people have always moaned and had this attitude, regardless of whether it's something horrific or something trivial, because people adapted and it changed society significantly. For example, one of the reasons serfdom in Western Europe went away is because there wasn't enough peasants to work the land. So they had, suddenly the balance of power had changed because they were in much more demand, and the lords couldn't just turf them out and find other people. So that's just one example. There's lots of stuff happened, but and things like people consider the capture of Constantinople, or they used to, maybe not so much now, but the capture of Constantinople by the Turks in 1453 was considered an awful event. It was the last flame of ancient Rome snuffed out, a bastion of Christendom conquered by Muslim invaders, as they saw it then. But that cut off a massive, important trade route for Western Europe, which forced them to look elsewhere, which led to the discovery of the Americas.
Yeah.
And what my point there is that at the time, what was considered a terrible event ended up causing something which completely transformed Europe forever.
Yeah.
In a way that was, again, this is getting into, again, it's cause and effect. It causes good and bad things.
Yeah.
It always does. The way we adapt, it will always have good and it will always have bad. And it's futile to just look at the bad and say, look at this awful situation we're in, look how terrible it is, it's just getting worse, it will always get worse. No, it won't. It will not get better or worse, it will change. And it's pointless at looking at it in a case of good or bad, it's just change.
Yeah. Well,
just
it's almost
to play
like
devil's advocate.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
Just to play devil's advocate, I would argue in this case, what if it's the dissatisfaction that fuels the fire of ambition, Rob?
Oh shit.
You need to feel like you're like everything is shit, and like you need to be frustrated with things in order to get people to improve them.
Yeah, I'm not saying people won't be I'm not saying people shouldn't feel frustrated. I'm just saying it's natural.
Yeah.
And there's no reason to look at today or whenever you are at your given time and see it through your own lens and just assume that that's the worst because that's all you've experienced, because it's not.
Oh right.
Yeah.
I thought Adam was just on about nihilism in general.
I was, but
I think that's what a lot of modern nihilism is, though, isn't it? It's looking at today and thinking that human beings today are uniquely bad or uniquely negative, when we're not. We're no different than human beings were in the past. We just think differently.
For me, I'm more on about just general dissatisfaction anyway. I think nihilism, to me, is more of like a complete and utter, like, you don't see the meaning or good or purpose in anything at all to do with humanity itself, almost.
I don't think people did in the past, though. They just didn't look at it like that. They didn't have nihilism wasn't a philosophy that had been explored. But the ideas behind it were always there. People
what are we even talking about?
Because people...
I've lost what we're even talking about.
No. Okay. I'll straight basic, because I think what Rob's saying is basically, you know, there's good and bad sides to history, and one of the things that we look at the moment as things are unfolding to us often, and maybe it's part of, and this is me interjecting it, but maybe it's part of like the animal mind. It focuses on the negative so easily because that's survival.
Yeah, that's the immediate threat.
Right, and so we focus so heavily on the bad that's happening and forget all of the good stuff, you know, and it's so easy to just remember the bad. But I think, Jake, what you're bringing up is a really, really interesting point, because you're talking about how, you know, often nihilism can be a springboard into improvement. Am I right?
Well, I don't know. No, because I'm talking, I think more general dissatisfaction, that is. Nihilism, in my mind, is like a... Nihilism defined, and this is my idea when you mention nihilism, is the rejection of all religious and moral principles in the belief that life is meaningless.
Yes.
That's like a very, like, to the core kind of, like, nothing is worth doing.
Okay, but so I feel like a lot of people can feel that, because I think where I was going, I guess, is that, and like you were saying, with general dissatisfaction can lead to certain things. I think general dissatisfaction can go in two directions. You can feel generally dissatisfied, look at the world, you know, in this lens of everything's burning around me, and you can either go, well, I'm just going to peel back, focus on myself, try to improve, fuel my own fire, in the great words of Jake, and, you know, do running, do these things that improve myself. Or I think another extreme that dissatisfaction can lead you towards is that you start seeing more and more meaninglessness in everything, and you can end up becoming a nihilist. And I've met people who are they've reached that point. It's almost like, and it's really sad because it's almost like they don't see a purpose to anything. They don't do it, whatever it might be. And instead of looking at that in, a sense of, well, then I need to find meaning, they kind of just accept it and then just keep on living like, automatons, just going through life in autopilot. And it comes in some ways, it links up to the philosophy of absurdism. So Albert Camus talks a lot about absurdism in that he argues that really when you look at the meaning of life and trying to find meaning in the universe, you can't, because the universe is random, things happen all the time randomly, and you can't really fit purpose to the universe. There's nothing truly understandable about it, really. It's just kind of random, it's out there, shit happens, and you can't really do much about it.
Exactly. I think that's what I was trying to get at in my point, in the fact that what was that definition you brought up, Jake? Was it total rejection of all religious and moral
principles?
Yeah, well, I think
saying that life is meaningless.
Yeah, I think that's a completely naive outlook, because life doesn't necessarily have to have meaning. Life is what you make of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I'd argue that is the meaning of life.
Yeah.
To find your own meaning.
Exactly, but this is kind of where Camus goes with it, because Camus like, yes, there is no meaning to life. There is no meaning to the universe, and actually, he makes the argument of that actually when you come to that understanding, it is quite rational that some people would then go, well, what's the point? I might as well just kill myself. It's quite extreme, but that's one of the the things that he discusses. But he says that yes, the universe is absurd. Yes, it doesn't make sense. Yes, there's no meaning to it. But you shouldn't just fall into this idea of like, I'm just going to be depressed by that meaning. It's that you can still have experiences in the world. You can still, go for a long run and feel the satisfaction of completing that. You can still go out and taste a beautiful apple. It tastes delicious. You can do all of these things and explore all of this. Yes, the universe might not have a meaning, but you can just experience it. You exist. You exist. So why not just spend your life finding these new experiences and enjoying it? And actually, Camus wrote a book called The Plague, which is very, I suppose, pertinent to the coronavirus pandemic, in that, it's about this town which gets the plague, and the main character is like a doctor. And essentially, he's like, it has this whole absurdism stuff woven into it. And it's like, people will ignore stuff. They will not take it seriously. They'll lose their minds over it. Everyone will go through their own different things and trying to find meaning to things, because we naturally try and seek meaning. But the doctor, he's just like, I'm just going to go in, do my job, treat my patients, and then when I'm done, I will, I have to do that because that's life. But I will find satisfaction in that grind, because he like goes out and swims in the ocean and enjoys himself, does all of these things. And it's another book of his, I'll just drop this in real quick. I think it's more of an essay, is the myth of Sisyphus. So Sisyphus was an ancient Greek king in mythology, who was punished by the gods because he tried to trick them or something like that. And he was punished to essentially carry a large rock up a hill, and at the end of the day, the rock would roll down and you have to do it again. And Camus was saying, well, this is kind of an analogy of life. It doesn't make sense. It's meaningless. It's kind of cruel, and it's easy to see it pointless and existence being pointless. But he was like, you have to imagine Sisyphus carrying up that rock and still finding joy in the life, because there's small experiences along the way. This is his life. He's still kind of finding certain things funny. He's finding things enjoyable. You have to imagine him with a smile on his face, because at the end of the day, we're living this life, which is analogous to Sisyphus's, curse, I suppose. And yes, it is a grind. Yes, it is kind of meaningless and it's painful, but we can also find all of these little experiences which enrich our lives, which make our lives more enjoyable. And that, in some ways, is kind of how we have to try and perceive existence.
Yeah, I agree. It's, again, I don't have a huge amount to say on that definition of nihilism you put forward. I think that's the one we're going on, really, rather than a more deep. It's a more superficial view of it, isn't it? I suppose. But we can't go too deep into it because it would bore everyone even more.
Sorry.
No, I was just going to say, it's like you say with the story of Sisyphus. He didn't just give in to despair. He just got on with it, and you've just got to do what you can, haven't you? And try and find solutions that work for you.
Yeah.
In life, and trial and error, and never be afraid to admit you were wrong and try something different.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there are that many nihilists out there anyway. So
no,
there are.
It's trendy to at the moment though to say, to go on about what a curse humans are, and I think it goes hand in hand with the kind of fetishization we have of nature and wildlife, which is mostly done by people who never see nature and never see wildlife, or by programs that pander to those people, because nature is vicious, nature is merciless.
Pro deforestation.
No, not at all. But I'm just realistic about what animals are like, and the idea that animals are superior to humans or equal to humans morally. If you think that, then you really need to rethink your life, because they're really not. A human being has far more value than an animal. Even if they are a terrible person, not even if they are a terrible person, they may be a terrible person, but they equally may be a great person, or a person who is bad but is able to change their ways. An animal will always, an animal's nature will always follow them. If you have a dog that through unfortunate circumstances has become aggressive and antisocial, there's no changing it quite often. If a dog is aggressive and bites someone, you have to have it put down, don't you? You don't have to do that with a person. You can change a person.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this actually quite a lot recently, and how people always have the potential to be good, I think, and that because especially when you look at like extremists and stuff like that. I remember I was listening to a lot of stuff by Daryl Davis, and people who don't know who Daryl Davis is, he's this black blues singer / guitarist who had a lifelong interest in what causes racism, and he ended up, the short story is that he ended up meeting loads of KKK neo-Nazi people, trying to engage with them to understand why they're racist, and often through these conversations and listening to them, treating them, with respect, he was able to actually, pull them out of these extremist views and these extremist groups. And I think that's the lesson that I think a lot of us need to start walking around with, is that actually all of these people on the other side are human beings too. They're people who experience life the same way we do. They have, or the same senses to experience life, the same kinds of the ability to perceive things. It's just that we're coming at it from a different angle, and so are they. And they may have had, all of these weird extreme influences on their lives, which cause them to go down this dark path. And that's kind of the message of American History X. It's a perfect example of that, and how these people are vulnerable people who get targeted by these predatory groups. And I almost argue, actually, we all need to kind of question our own allegiances to these two different groups, because I feel that the way general politics is being done is playing, and this is probably a controversial view, but that it's playing off of this almost extremist playbook, because it's such a good way to bottle people in, close them off from the other side, and then just, keep them locked into that position. I don't think it's going to work for them in the long run, because actually the majority of people don't exist within those bubbles where they can be easily captured. But it's all the stuff like, this need to get younger and younger people to vote and telling them to have an opinion on things. It's like, no, you need to figure out your own life first. I'd argue. I even at the age of 18, when I first went to vote, looking back on it now, I didn't know what the fuck I was doing. I hadn't formed a real sort of philosophy even to with which to put these different political parties under pressure with. And I think people need to focus in on themselves a lot more. And I think that's kind of what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah.
And bringing it back to what you said, Rob. Sorry, I went on a rant again, but the problem of dehumanizing human beings, and even if they've done atrocious things or whatever, I think that there's always this common expression of humans have the seed of evil. It's the primal self. It's the need to, this idea that you're capable of flicking the switch and you can do horrible things. We saw that in the Soviet Union. We saw that in Nazi Germany. But at the same time, I think humans have the seed of good in them as well. And it's that people are capable of doing such amazing acts of good, even the small things. You're so capable of reaching out to it. And the reason it doesn't get that much publicity is because they are these small acts of kindness. They're these small things that day in and day out we do to improve people's lives around us, and we don't even realize it. And I think there is that seed of good in us, and that needs to be nurtured in a lot of people, because they've been through a shitty life where they haven't had the opportunity to nurture that.
Yeah, you don't get many people who end up doing heinous things that had a nice, well-adjusted upbringing.
Exactly.
But I think, coming back to fetishizing animals against what people are like.
Shit.
Yeah, fetishizing animals. Not in that way. No, it's
cancelled.
For example, groups like PETA, the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals.
Oh shit.
Lots of celebrities endorse them, and I think a lot of it is down to clever marketing. Because you look at what PETA actually believes and what they do, it's insane and it's illogical. They don't believe there should be any relationship between humans and animals at all. But domesticated animals have been selectively bred by humans to be domesticated animals. That, in a way, we have manipulated their nature to serve our own needs. And yeah, maybe you could say, as PETA probably do, oh well, that's wrong. But it's already happened, and the animals are as they are now. So to say, well, we shouldn't be doing it at this point is absurd. But it's, for example, they don't believe pets should be a thing. But I'm sorry, but house cats, a lot of them like being house cats. Dogs like their owners. A dairy cow is perfectly happy to be in a field and to wander through and get milked every day and sit there with its trough of food munching away while it's got the things on its udders. It's not bothered. They don't mind. Animals are simple and human beings aren't, and that's the distinction people seem to not grasp. The idea that a cow, it just doesn't have the same mind, and it amazes me how many people just don't seem to get that point. And they'll, fine, if you don't like the idea of eating animals, don't. But don't say it's immoral to, because it's not, because it's how we've evolved. It's how other animals have evolved. And they get into these, I suppose it comes back to what we've said before about getting into extreme positions and just thinking, well, this is what I believe and I'm not changing. And anyone who tries to or disagrees with me is my enemy.
Yeah, I get you. I mean, maybe we'll leave the animal discussion for another day, because I do have thoughts on it.
It was to do with nihilism, wasn't it? I suppose it is going a bit
definitely
off track. But just to sum up what I was saying about it is, to believe that there is no distinction between animals and humans is crazy, I think. But that's not to say you don't have respect for animals and you don't treat them as humanely as possible. You know, for example, like I say, I don't think there's anything wrong eating meat, and I think anyone who says there is, to be honest, I think that if you choose not to eat meat, fine, that's great. If you then say it is immoral for humans to eat meat, you are immoral. Because you are taking an extreme position which goes against what is a perfectly natural occurrence which happens all over nature, and insisting that you know better. And as far as I'm concerned, that's totally unacceptable. Sorry, am I going a bit too extreme now?
Yeah, I'm going to get cancelled by Pete. No, I'm just kidding. No, I guess sort of bringing it back to nihilism. I think what I was trying to get at with nihilism, I think, is that not necessarily, because we've got the dictionary definition of it, and I think that definition is used a lot by philosophers to argue why, you know, there is meaning to life and whatever. But it's one aspect. I think nihilism, the aspects that feed into it, can often infect our lives in different ways and in different quantities. Like, we can sometimes go through these moments where we feel miserable and things aren't working out for us necessarily, and that we can then end up in this position where we do think that there's meaninglessness to everything or whatever it might be. And I think that's more what I was getting into. It's that we almost have these peaks and troughs of definition, or not definition, sorry, peaks and troughs of how we feel. And I think a lot of the time that's when nihilism can seep its claws in. And I think one of my personal solutions to this has been trying to look inward, trying to improve myself. And I think it almost comes to this. I'm just name dropping philosophers at this point, but this is probably the first Peppermint philosophy about philosophy. But Friedrich Nietzsche, I've said his name horribly, but he has the concept of Übermensch or Overman, and I think a lot of people can mischaracterize what this idea is because it was.
They think of they think of Nazis or the Leopold and Loeb murders.
Right, and it was totally bastardized by these people, and I think actually what he was getting at was more that it's this condition where you're trying to seek a form of, I don't want to say transcendence, but it's this sort of internal state where you're essentially experiencing things and trying to experience different things and become better at them, improve skills, and in effect improve yourself. Because he's got this whole idea of, you know, in your life you're the camel, the lion, and then the child. And basically the camel is the form of life where you're told what to do and you do it, and you don't know why you do it, but you just do it. The lion is when you start questioning those things that you're doing, and then you start either destroying them because they're pointless, or you do them because you understand why it is that it's necessary to do them. And then the child is ultimately the form where you've conquered all of those things, and then in this new state you can freely start experiencing life and doing different things to improve yourself. And I think that final bit is kind of what feeds into my life, is trying to find these experiences I want to seek. So running, lifting, writing, playing guitar, things like this, these different experiences I want to explore more. I come back to those and I try and, set new challenges, become better. And I think that's what being the overman is trying to get at, is that you're trying to reach these new goals, to experience life differently. And whenever I get into those slumps where life doesn't feel like it's going well, where I feel like things are going wrong and I feel miserable as a result, I just go back into, I almost like try and switch off. And it takes time, because sometimes I just ruin it for a while, as everyone does. But then I try to, push myself to go for a run. Even if I don't feel like it, I know that going for a run makes me feel good. I know it makes me feel good, so I do it despite my brain telling me I don't want to do it. I do it anyway, and then I start to feel better. And the more times I do these things that I know will make me improve my mental health or my mental state, I do those, and eventually I get out of those troughs in those brief moments of nihilism, I suppose. I was wondering if you guys had that kind of experience, and if you find ways of dealing with those.
I find it with cooking a proper meal. Quite often I just can't be bothered, but on the rare occasion I do go to the effort and cook a proper meal and spend, an hour or so doing it, you feel good at the end. Especially when you think as well, because when I cook something, I tend to cook quite a lot so I can have it for the next couple of days. And you feel like, I've cooked something nice, it's quite nutritious, and I'm going to enjoy it, and I know I like it because I made it. And
it sounds like what we're sort of getting at, but not really like hitting the target on, is basically what we're trying to say is how we deal with sort of these nihilistic despair creeping in, and how we cope with that, and how we challenge it and fight against it. And my view sort of comes down to this: a lot of people turn to religion or some kind of spiritual like destiny, or like a lot of people sort of believe that whatever kind of suffering has been imposed upon them is meant to happen for whatever reason that it's going to lead to, or is like character development. A lot of people joke about sometimes with their breakups and what have you. And like you can do that. You can sort of believe in destiny or a god or what have you. Or you can take the John Lennon approach, which is you turn around and say, I don't believe in Beatles, I just believe in me.
I think, yeah. So is that, would you say that's how you approach it?
100%.
Yeah.
I don't really buy into the whole like astrology stuff, or any kind of sort of destiny approach that like whatever kind of suffering you're going through is
preordained
because, because it's putting you on some path that's gonna grow you, and like suffering does make you grow as a result. That doesn't sort of change that, but a lot of people sort of believe like, somebody crashed into my car because this and this is supposed to happen, it's led me to here. And it's a very sort of hard thing to not buy into, especially the whole spiritual like God side, because it's so comforting.
It can
that's
be
when you have to turn around and be like, no, I'm going to believe in me, and basically take Adam's approach, which is you start working on yourself and start taking control of the things in your life to better yourself.
It can be a positive thing though as well to certain people. For example, the idea of predestination, that's very strong in Calvinism, the strain of Protestantism, and other groups that split off from that, like Quakers, for example. The idea that the path you have was chosen for you by God. And a lot of Calvinists used this as a driving force to push them forward, because they believed God has destined me to do this, so I'm going to work as hard as I can at it because it's God's will. So in certain circumstances it can help people. That's partly why in places like Switzerland and Scotland as well is another example, and the Netherlands is probably the best, where Calvinist religious philosophy was strong. You saw booms in commerce and small countries punching above their weight because the population was so motivated to succeed.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of a hard thing to sort of look in the face at as well, when, like, I guess in our approach is more believing in yourself and improving yourself to sort of manage nihilism creeping in and sort of like feeling despair. It's a hard thing to sort of deal with if it's like true and utter meaningless suffering. Well, not sort of meaningless, maybe that's the wrong way to put it, but sort of suffering that feels like it's been imposed on you, like like sort of that Bruce Almighty idea, like the whole smite me, almighty smiter, like you're just being punished for the sake of it.
The problem with this is something I was thinking before I meant to say, actually coming on to that. I think a lot of the attitude today people have, this whole idea, you know, humans are rubbish, society's crap, all that sort of thing. There's almost a narcissism to it, I think. It's an idea, it's like a kind of self-flagellation, because self-pity is quite a tempting emotion, really, isn't it? It can feel good to sit there and wallow in everything that's going wrong for you, can't it? And think, oh, yeah, this is awful, this is terrible, isn't it? You know, and just...
It's sort of where romanticised depression comes from.
Yeah.
Comes out of that, doesn't it?
Yeah, and in reality, and I suppose it's a bit sad, really, because we all... It happens to everybody, I'm sure. I don't think anyone doesn't have phases where they feel self-pity. But when you see other people expressing it, almost everyone's instant reaction is revulsion, isn't it?
Yeah.
No one finds self-pity to be edifying in any way, to the point where they were... And I think it's partly where the stigma against certain mental illnesses comes from, because we have such a... We just can't help it. We have such a natural aversion to people wallowing in their own self-pity, because it is, in a certain way, a bit of an expression of narcissism, isn't it? Which is why I think it's good to look at it like that, because it forces you not to do it, and it forces you to actually think, what can be done to improve this, rather than just letting it overwhelm you.
Yeah, right. Because I never thought of it that way. Actually, I think you're striking a chord there, because it is that kind of... I mean, we do have that natural instinct to just be like, you know, almost have revulsion for that kind of thing, but it's so easy. We've all done it.
Yeah.
We all, you know, fall into these moments where we feel sorry for ourselves. We blame others. That's another big thing, is blaming others for our woes. And how often I don't know about you guys, but there have been tons of times where I've been angry at other people for stuff that's happening in my life. And I've, you know, it's strangers and stuff, you know, someone does something in the street, or, you know, does what looks at me funny or whatever, and I'm just like, oh, fuck you, whatever. And like, you don't necessarily always consider, maybe something's happened in their life. Something shit might have happened to them, and you know, they're going through something just like I'm going through something, and that's always a possibility.
Yeah,
but
that's
ultimately...
sorry, carry on.
No, but ultimately, I think the liberating thing is to understand that sometimes, and often, I don't want to say all the time, because there are obviously, you know, certain, you know, mental illnesses and stuff like that where you do need some sort of intervention or help in some other method, however that comes. But there are so many things where you can start to peel back, you know, your depression and hatred of the world, you know, potentially, when you realize how much control you have over yourself. You know, you have so much control over how you're feeling, what you can do to improve your mood. And in turn, I think that when you improve yourself, you can start improving people around you. Like, you know, you can encourage...
I think that's a little bit harder said. That's easier said than done.
Yeah.
Oh,
there are times when like your despair can just be such an anchor, like, around your neck, that no matter how hard you like hold your head up, it still weighs on you.
Absolutely.
It's very sort of like...
There's usually a cause for that, though, isn't there? Unless,
well, yeah,
unless
that's where sort of like, you know, like actually seeking help. And I'd argue against the whole idea that you have so much control over yourself, because I'd say that the human mind is so lost on us that actually we don't have as much control as we think we do.
No.
I would argue that actually there's so much components and so much like of your subconscious and your primal brain that plays into how you are and how you feel, that oftentimes you do need like help. And like I think you naturally sort of seek out things that will improve how you are without you even realizing.
Yes.
But I don't. I'd argue against the whole control thing, and like
Well,
I do think you have some control and you can sort of help yourself, but I think most of the time your control is very sort of under the surface, and like you don't even understand on a conscious level what is going on.
I'd agree with that, but I would say in terms of what is causing any unease that you might be suffering, if it's not something, something physical, like, for example, mental illness or physical illness or something like that. If it's something external, for example, something you're nervous about that's going to happen, or something that you need to do that's weighing on your mind, the best way to alleviate that is to work towards achieving it, basically. If it's something that needs to be done, for example, if you're a student and you've not done a piece of work and you know it's in soon, do it. And it's easier said than done, because I never did it. I always worked last minute. Or it could just be something as simple as needing to tidy up the house.
Mm-hmm.
The best thing to do is just do it, because quite often it's amazing how powerful procrastination is, and how fun things can seem when you're doing them in place of something you really ought to be doing instead.
Yeah.
But you're either nervous about doing, or you just don't want to do. For example, I don't know, if there's people around and you don't really want to get involved with them, it can sometimes be tempting to, stay upstairs and take ages getting ready because you're nervous about meeting new people. Whereas in most cases, you just do what you need to do and then be down there. Or you end up watching something on telly that you normally wouldn't even give a second thought to because you don't want to do the hoovering.
Yeah. No, I think... Sorry.
Little things like that can build up, I think. And if you keep working towards them, it's I think you can feel a lot more, not necessarily happy or sad, but just more secure in yourself, by just facing your problems rather than delaying them.
Yeah.
But again, it's more difficult.
Like subconscious thing, and sometimes you don't even realize what's going on, and sometimes you don't have as much control as you think. Because say like you have I don't know how to sort of frame it in an analogy, but sort of sometimes, like you said, facing your problems is the thing you should be doing, but you don't want to do it out of fear, but you don't even recognize why that is. But then if you do take the plunge and do it, then you start to notice like your sort of problems might start to alleviate.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
And most of the time as well, especially if it's to do with social situations, I think we think far too much about what other people are thinking. If someone doesn't know you that well, most of the time they won't give you a second thought.
It's kind of a natural human thing though, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
We're like very sort of it's a thing. I don't know if we'll ever sort of break away from it, but like constantly under the microscope of the people, your social community, basically.
Yeah. Well, I don't know where I mentioned it, but I don't know if we were recording when I said it, but I was saying it to Adam. I heard this thing that was quite interesting, where it was actually in some weird hippy dippy thing I was watching.
I know.
Yeah, where I heard this thing about. It was actually some alternative therapy video I was watching. I don't believe in that stuff, but I just like watching it. I just think it's interesting to see what sort of things people do. And at one point, it was about some kind of energy regeneration or something, and in this sort of belief system, the energy was like holding on to negative emotions and in parts of the body, that sort of alternative. The thing about meridians and all that sort of stuff. The idea that there's an energy flow that can be disrupted, but in the middle of all that stuff, I won't call it nonsense, but in the middle of all that, she actually said something quite profound, because she said one of the emotions that was being held in wherever it was shame, And she says, and we want to get rid of that because shame is it's a useless emotion. It doesn't do anything. We feel it, but it serves no purpose. And it's true, isn't it? That there is absolutely no purpose to shame.
Yeah.
And it's all it does is hold us back.
Yeah, but it's also such a powerful emotion.
Yeah.
And I think so. A lot of this stuff actually reminds me of something that Jordan Peterson talks about with the whole idea of like, it's easy to fall into these because we have these natural behaviors which were presumably to, they helped us evolutionarily to avoid bad things. So it's like, if you do something which has a bad result, you're less likely to do that in the future. And that's kind of like the idea of, you don't run near a cliff because you almost fell off at one time, so you're not going to do that again, right? Yeah. So in a more natural setting, in quotation marks, makes sense to have that programming in our brain.
Yeah.
But now we're in this sort of social, when you take that in a social environment, you can often have these things where it's like you kind of end up with these anxieties as a result of, say, maybe you asked a girl out and she rejected you and you felt embarrassed. So you're less likely to do that again in the future. And the more times you get rejected, or the more times these things, result in a negative, have a negative result, you're less likely to actually do them in the future.
Yeah, it can even be something as basic as what you wear as well and how you express yourself. Like if you bought a pair of shoes that you really liked and then someone made a negative comment about it, you might not wear the shoes, but in reality, really, if you like them, you should wear them. Because, again, it comes down to the fact that most people really don't care what you've got on your feet.
Mm-hmm.
And especially if they enjoy your company, they're not really interested in what you're wearing, as long as you don't look at, obviously if you walk around in a chicken suit all the time, people are going to be... You've got to be conscious of other people's, tolerances.
Right, and there's I think where Peterson ended with it is that it's like, well, you should try and rise to these challenges because at the end of the day, it's your brain that's holding you back a lot of the time. Peterson was talking about is that, you need to rise to these challenges to, essentially slay these demons so that essentially you're more likely to take these risks, even, come what may. It might be a negative, it might be a positive, who knows? But at the end of the day, you will improve your lot in life if you do those things. And I think that links to this whole idea of like, you shouldn't let negative, reactions from external people affect you. You should try to avoid being affected by what other people think because, there might be certain things where it's useful, where it's like a useful comment, like, don't put your hand near fire because you'll burn it. There's useful stuff. But then there's also really useless and actually really destructive stuff.
Yeah,
like
it's good.
If you go to like, you're trying to improve yourself, you're overweight, you go to the gym, right? And then someone gives you a comment like, oh, you weren't there for very long, you didn't do this, blah blah blah. It's like, oh, is that it? Those sorts of negative comments, people who say them they might be saying them as like a passing comment. They don't realize how much that can affect someone who's hearing that, especially when they're right at the start of trying to improve themselves. And what I'd say to that is that you need to just fuck them, ignore it, because at the end of the day, you're doing something that's going to improve yourself. Who gives a shit what someone thinks about it? Because for the long run, at the end of the day, it's probably their own insecurity which is pushing them to make that comment anyway. And either they're gonna join you, or they're just gonna keep on living their own shitty life, doing lazy stuff, and just saying snarky comments about people who are improving themselves. So, fuck them. Just do what makes you better. Do what makes you feel better. And at the end of the day, you'll get there eventually to, hopefully, to a more, I'm not going to say you reach nirvana, you're going to be in the best place possible. You're going to be in a better place than where you started. That's not to say you won't have different demons to slay along the way. But no, do you think, have you been experiencing more comments like that with your running? Because I know you
What do you
mentioned you had like one or two
Oh, the
comments
sort of
about
voices of discouragement.
yeah,
Oh yeah, 100%. But
and
like you're right, you sort of have to focus in and like put other people's voices aside, because I mean it sort of circles back to the whole like human nature thing and like no capacity for evil. I think a lot of human sort of traditional sort of primal self still being there is to, you want to see other tribes, hence other people kind of thing, like their position lower than yours. You want to be higher in the pecking order, so you sort of belittle other people's like
yeah.
chasing like improvement.
Yeah, I get what you mean. I get what you mean there.
Yeah, I think sometimes though that can be an expression of overcompensation, where they're doing it to reassure themselves.
Yeah. I mean, I think basically the sort of roundabout point we're making throughout the whole podcast, humans are complicated.
Yeah, but at the end, I think the caveat to that is you're complicated, but you kind of have to find your way in life, and it's like philosophy. I think is a great way to explore how other people have thought about those things, but it doesn't mean shit unless you come up with your own way of thinking about it, and you use them as a springboard to get you somewhere, to think about these questions, to think about yourself, but ultimately you have to come up with the solution, and that's going to be a lot of trial and error. That's going to be a lot of none of these things that they talk about are going to get you to that end goal where it's like you totally above suffering. It's impossible. You're always going to have struggles. Even if you live the perfect life according to whatever someone's saying, you're still going to feel times where you're miserable and things aren't going to work. And it's that I think you need the tool set to help you get out of that, rather than necessarily thinking that you're never going to come to it again. I think thank you, Jake, for pointing out that I was getting onto that point of like oh yeah, it's all mental and you can figure it out and get out of those positions. But you're right. There are some things which you can't necessarily, you can't get out of alone, and you need help, and you need people that you can talk to, friends, family, or maybe that's talking to a counselor of some sort. You need to have it takes a certain amount of courage and self-understanding to be able to come to those conclusions, because those are difficult things to approach.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's the same principle though, in a way. It's just a different way of needing to approach the problem and find it's a different solution that's not necessarily as clear, but you can look at it the same way. It's something that needs to be done that isn't being done.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. It's the whole idea of think no more about what a good man should be, just be one. Shout out to Marcus Aurelius.
Be the change you want to see in the world.
Hell yeah, that's a great point to leave it on. I think.
Who's that from?
Gandhi.
Gandhi. Oh, I got a Gandhi quote.
Shout out to Gandhi. What is it?
Can I finish with the Gandhi quote as well?
Yeah, go for it.
Okay. Don't believe everything you read on the internet.
That's one of my favorites. Anyway, I think that wraps it up for this one. We've been going for, I'm not entirely sure how long, but that was a good conversation. We'll do it again.
This was a lot more fun than I was expecting it to be.
Yeah, right. I told you, sometimes you need to just have that outlet to have an intellectualish discussion.
Yeah.
But yeah, so catch more material on peppermintphilosophypodcast.com. There's Peppermint Chill there.
Yeah, Peppermint Chill. We talk about films and turkey twizzlers and other things that we find amusing, and occasionally stuff like this as well.
That's true. You can also find those on Spotify. Just type in Peppermint Chill or Peppermint Philosophy. There's a YouTube channel. Again, yeah, just search it up. Anyway, thank you for listening. If you are listening, that's it. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.